Now our panel can come on up and take your seats up here. Thank you. And I'll introduce a man who probably doesn't need an introduction at this point in the weekend. Mark Lee is a KFA trustee as well as being on the Oak Grove School Board. He was also a teacher at the Valley School for a number of years and the founding principal of the Oak Grove School.
It's good to see you on this beautiful May day. This building is the first of all of the Oak Grove School buildings. We started here with about 15 students, and Kay had said to us, build something that doesn't look like any recognizable building in the world. Not Italian, not French, not Japanese, not American. More like a piece of furniture. And I think we accomplished that with this unusual building. What we'd like to present to you today is a story of a new movement, a new initiative, which was started by Oak Grove School Director Jody Grass last year. But in fact, Jody has pulled together and initiated something which started many, many, many years ago. When Krishnamoorthy first was interested in having a school in India, which is now more than 75 years ago, and he started with the Rishi Valley School in South India, and then the Rajghat School in North India. His intention was that these schools would be places of learning, not of traditional education, not schools in the accepted traditional sense. They would not be institutions. They would be the gathering together of good people who would work with children to expose them to the world and for them to discover something of themselves. He always intended that these schools would work cooperatively together. So, Oak Grove School is one of 8 schools in the world. There are the 6 in India and the Brockwood Park School in England, all of them working with the various Krishnamoorthy foundations in their respective countries. These are not separate schools. In fact, they are one school with 8 campuses because they share the same intent of education. Krishnamoorthy was the founder, and the people who are in the schools all can move easily between the schools. Krishnamoorthy said to us here, he said, take school out of learning. Well, in some respects, you need an institution like a school. You need classrooms, an office, curriculum, fundraising, faculty. That's the organizational side. But the other dimension which brings everyone together is the intent to learn. So this new initiative, which Jody has started, will work on multiple levels concurrently. The schools now, and have for the last 20 plus years, exchanged students and teachers on a regular basis. Each year the Oak Grove School seniors travel to India and they learn. They learn about a different culture. They learn how students in other countries learn. They are exposed to different foods, music, culture, particularly the youth culture. And when teachers come, we haven't had so many students come yet, but when the teachers come to visit Oak Grove, similarly they observe, discover how the Oak Grove approaches the challenge of creating a learning environment. The schools share publications, they share emails, they share conferences, and the various projects of education that each school hosts. We had the students at the Pathshala school in south of Chennai and the Oak Grove students on a virtual televised conference where they worked together to discover the various projects that the two schools share, and to get to know each other and to share their own experiences in learning. What this provides is a whole host of dimensions of education that I think is missing from other schools, and that is cross-cultural learning, sharing the dimensions of culture, the dimensions of education that are unique to different environments. The schools in India reflect very much Indian culture. Oak Grove, situated where it is here in California, Brockwood in southern England, they all have different environments. What's common, of course, is their intent. But sharing these, meeting fellow, for the teachers to meet their colleagues, for students to meet other students, this provides a different kind of learning environment, which this initiative is furthering. We have, for the last 20 years, had a Krishnamoorthy Journal of Education. Could you hold it up? The Krishnamoorthy Journal is a collection of essays and writings by teachers and students, trustees, school heads in all the K schools from around the world. So they all provide texts for these annual publications. These are circulated among the schools, parents read them, teachers have access to them, and they're sent to university libraries and other places where teachers are in training. The journal has proved to be a great unifying feature of the schools. I wanted to also point out the rich library of material that we have regarding education that have all originated out of the 8 schools. The stack here on my left, the taller stack, are all books by Krishnamoorthy and collections of his talks to students, teachers, and parents in the 8 schools. These talks and discussions and dialogues are a rich collection of Kay finding the ways that he can convey to adults and children the very subtle and yet complex dimensions of the learning process. The next stack, the shorter stack, are books written by teachers, school heads, and a student of a K school. These books describe the founding of the schools, the great challenge within a school of meeting Krishnamurthi's challenge, and also their challenges of fundraising, of having students, of selecting teachers, and it's all in the form of first-hand narrative experience of those heads, teachers, and students. So, we have a great library for students and parents and faculty to draw on for materials related to this initiative. I feel it's more than an initiative. I feel it's an actual movement. It's a movement that reflects the fact that these schools have been in operation for more than 75 years. They have founded something unique, something completely different in the world of education. About 30 years ago, the Prime Minister of India acknowledged this, and she assigned a Krishnamurthy book to all the central government schools of India. There was a new school initiative about 10 years ago that asked the foundation to help in the training of new teachers in India, because they recognized the fact that K schools offer something quite different. The psychological dimension of education, which is missing from all other schools. That psychological dimension has no textbook, it has no curriculum, there's nothing in print. It is all exchanged, exposited, developed in the relationships between teachers and students, between parents and students. So, we're here today to talk with you about our various experiences in education, both from in front of the desk and behind the desk, teachers and students. And we would like to engage you in this exploration by urging you to ask questions. More can be discovered and revealed through the dialogue process, the questioning process, than simply hearing a few people give speeches. So we'd like to involve you as well. But first, let me introduce the panel. To my left is Ashton McSaylor. He is on the faculty of Oak Grove School, and he will be bringing to you his rich experience of actually working in a Krishnamoorthy school. Then we have two students, Sanaya Dundakar and Annalise Tolinar. Excuse me for fracturing the names. Both of them students in Oak Grove School, and Annalise has had, Sanaya has had the experience of also studying at the Rishi Valley School in South India. So please, I'll ask them to say something before we start the question and answer.
Excuse me. So, yes, I'm Ashton Max Saylor. I am the high school English teacher here at Oak Grove School, and I would like to invite you two to come in and find seats if you would like. Okay. No problem. So, as you said, I'm a member of the faculty here. I feel like Oak Grove is a very special place. When I first arrived here, I just could not believe my luck that I was selected to be the next English teacher, and felt like for me it was such a perfect fit, partly because I actually attended Oak Grove briefly when I was a child. So I was only able to come for 1 year due to family circumstances, but I came as a child, and I have these wonderful memories of running around the trees, of playing on the playground back there, of making plants grow on the back patio of room, I think it was C2 or C3 or something at that time. And I was born and raised in Ojai. My parents were very connected to India and a lot of the teachings and beliefs that come out of India. Ojai has a deep tradition of spirituality with, Krishnamurti, of course, being a luminary in that. And, excuse me, I'm still a little congested from a cold. But Aldous Huxley living here, and, many people, this tradition is very rich. And I grew up not only attending Oak Grove for a time, but also I came to see Krishnamurti speak with my father when I was just a wee lad, and traveled to India twice before I was 5 years old. So anyway, coming here as an adult now, I'm a little more aware of the broader context than I was when I was a child. And I have to say, I think one of the things that's really special about this school is feeling like we are not an island. We are a member of a community, and obviously our day-to-day lives are mostly very focused on this school and what's around us. Not even just this school, but my classroom, just what I have to deal with day to day. But I had the privilege of visiting Brockwood 2 years ago. 1 year ago. Yeah, not the most recent trip, but the one before. 2 trips ago, just over 1 year ago. And, I could walk into that school and I didn't feel like a stranger. I felt like a member of the community who they just hadn't met yet. And I feel 100%, I haven't had the chance to visit any of the schools in India yet, but I know it will be the same way. I could meet any of those teachers, and any of them could meet me, and we would feel like we're part of the same community. We're not separate groups, and that's a very nice feeling. And being able to, there's also the retreats and the different events and trainings, and there's a sense, and staff that move between them. There's a sense of unity and opportunity outside of just these walls and this campus. And one of the big parts of that, as Mark mentioned, is the Krishnamurthy Journal, which is a great way for this larger community to have a voice. And I actually have an article in the most recent edition that I wrote last summer based on, it doesn't really present any answers, but it raises it asks a lot of questions exploring the idea of grading and assessment, and how do we grade in a just and fair manner that encourages the kind of inner learning that we want our students to find. And I'm afraid I can't say that I found answers, but it at least explores the questions. So I think that pretty much sums up what I have to offer here. So without further ado, here's Sanaya.
My name is Sanaya. I'm a senior at Oak Grove this year, and I came here in my junior year. And before that, I was at Rishi Valley for 4 years. And I also, earlier this year, I visited 3 other K schools in India, along with the rest of my senior class, when we were on our India trip. I feel like, for me, one school feels as much like home as the other, and because they share the same mission, and it definitely feels like a community to me.
I'm Annalise. I'm a junior, 11th grade at Oak Grove. Recently, I had the opportunity to go to Brockwood, the school in England, and it was amazing there. The 2 schools seemed to connect in our philosophies, but they did it in such different ways. And it was really cool to see the way they handled the philosophies of Krishnamoorthy. So I came to this school as a freshman from North Carolina. So we moved all the way across the country just to go to this school. The school I would have gone to was very competitive, and they taught things it was a very traditional school. They taught by the textbooks. There was harsh grading. People were even suicidal because it was just so intense. So at the end of the year, my family and I packed up and moved to Oak Grove, and I do not regret it. Okay.
So we now invite you to join us in exploring this further. Do you have questions? Do you have insights? Do you have a problem? Let's talk about it. Related to education, related to our school, and the whole process of learning. We open it up for you to join us. Please.
I wonder, you said you're a junior, and you went to Brockwood last year?
Yeah, last
This year?
over spring break, which was...
Can you say more about that experience, and how did Oak Grove facilitate that, and is that an option as part of the school? And I have another question, if you would. How can you say your teachers bring in the spirit of Krishnamurti on a daily basis? So what is it about the actual classroom environment that your teachers create that makes you feel like this Krishnamurti spirit or intention of this school being different? How does that actually manifest?
So starting last year, we've had 2 juniors go to Brockwood. So they're starting to do that every year. And although no one from Brockwood has come to Oak Grove, I believe they're starting to figure out a way to exchange people. So they just chose 2 of us. We applied. We said there was a group of us who wanted to go, and depending on many factors, they chose us. So it was all expenses paid. It was just an amazing opportunity. I had never gone to England before. It was really interesting. Brockwood was just such a cool an interesting school. Oak Grove seems like a midpoint between traditional and alternative, trying to mesh them together to find a real, like a more of a reality. Brockwood almost seems like it's not a real school. No, sorry. So how does Oak Grove take on the Krishnamoorthy aspect? So in school, we have the arts. There's the art of inquiry, the art of academics, all these different arts that they grade us on that are, sorry, I can't find the word, that we talk about in school. So art of inquiry, they ask us to think deeply about things. When I first came to the school, there was some kind of paper that we had to read, and they asked us questions about our opinions on it. And that was just so different for me. I had never had to actually think deeply. It was always, you have these questions, you have a paper, and then based on the paper, you find something in the text. It was never you had to think about something, which is kind of strange. And then the seniors do a lot about Krishnamurthy. They read his work. They have, in history, it's about ethics and religion. We have advisory, which is, we do a lot of reflecting. In history class, we have whole reflections. We have to write long essays on different aspects of history, and we write our opinions on it. And the environment here, calling teachers by their first name, that's a big change, but it makes you feel a lot closer to all the teachers and all the staff. Being a small school, we get to know everyone a lot better. We're all a lot closer to each other. Yeah. Any other questions?
So I don't know the answer to this question. I mean, schools exist in nations and cultures, but beyond the school being sort of sharing a community, has there been any thought of, in terms of having like a world citizen, where students graduate, go to higher education in different cultures, and I don't know how it can possibly be done with these national boundaries, but have careers in different cultures, because you have a very good advantage, having a community amongst different cultures, that you have something that other schools don't. So I don't know, just putting that out.
Yeah, I can. I'm Liz. I've been involved in the school as a mother since '87. And I got the chance to go to India, take the students, the senior. My husband was working there for 20 years, so I got to go to India 3 times. But what I want to say for that is, I think there's something about Krishnamurthy. He talks a lot about conditioning and image. For me, this is what's exploding when when I've seen the student going before India and after India, the image is implode or something. They go before India, the conditioning is still there. There's disease, there's poverty, all this is, even though it's, like Mark was saying, it's a community, the conditioning of being American is still there. So I think, in a sense, when there is the breaking of images, I think then we have a world citizen. I didn't need to answer the question, but that's what came up.
I was just going to add that I wouldn't say there's a formal program like that I'm aware of where you get world citizenship through Oak Grove, but I would say that this education prepares students just sort of in an intrinsic way. I mean, take Sanaya, for example, has lived and studied in both India and here in California. You know, all of our students go on the trip to India, have this extensive experience before they've even graduated high school with another culture. And from my own travels when I was that age, that is eye-opening. You don't know what, I mean, you have all these guesses, all these images in your head of what other countries look like that are usually very limited, flimsy, uncertain. And once you go there, some myths are exploded, and then you also see similarities that you didn't expect. And that's a powerful experience at that age. So I think a lot of, briefly, in an intrinsic way, it sort of cultivates that.
I come from a totally different environment. I taught 3 years in Rikers Island, a school that the New York City had to establish in the maximum security prison. And also I have taught in the New York City school system. And my question to you is, so it's a totally different environment to this wonderful Oak Grove School. My question is, children, I mean, how do you set limits, or do you set limits to the freedom that you want to give the kids, the children here? Because I find that they always try to push you towards push the limits as far as possible. What is the way in which you set these limits, and how do you administer those limits?
Can I start an answer to that? And maybe you can carry on. That raises several questions. And probably the most important one is, how does the school, how do the teachers deal with discipline? We asked that of Krishnamoorthy at the very beginning, because starting a school in America where there is such informality, where there's such a challenge constantly to authority, children behave in outrageous ways in society and in school and in their homes. And that we were concerned with, how do we set limits? What recourse does a teacher have when a child misbehaves? Kay went into the subject. Any subject in the school could not be finished with one answer. Some questions stayed on for years. And the question of discipline, authority, reward and punishment, these questions which he raised and we raised went on for a very long time, because we kept approaching them from different dimensions, from the dimension of a teacher, from that of a parent, from that of the society, from the responsibility that the school had ultimately. Cave gave two suggestions. He said that if a child is psychologically secure, deeply secure, they won't misbehave. That was the first one. The second one was, he said, the environment of the school, the environment of the home, will speak loudly to the child. That environment is not just the physical environment, the trees and the campus, but it's the psychological environment. a place where they are with people they're not afraid of. Faculty, staff, and parents who deal with them with affection, with love. But there was always the caution that love is not enough. You can give all the love in the world to a child, and they will still break the rules. They will still misbehave. So there's a caveat to that love is not enough. The adult must have a very firm grounding within, a firm understanding of how the child's mind works, the source of their language, the source of their behaviors. Why do they behave the way they do? What is it coming from? Without analyzing the child. This understanding of the child's learning process then is reflected in the response, the behavior of the teacher to the child. This leads to a sense of connection, of affection. This helps to provide the security. So, environment and security were the two tools that he suggested would work in this regard.
I think Mark said it really well. I would just add a little bit that we start with coming from a place of trust and relationship with this environment and security and connection, both love and understanding and respect between the students and the teachers. There's less of a need to act out, hopefully. You know, I mean, you come to a beautiful campus like this, and maybe you guys will agree. You come to a beautiful open campus with teachers who trust you and, you know, let you come and go on your own recognizance, and it invites the students to be respectful members of a community. It sends the message, we trust you, we respect you, and that invites students to behave in that way. And whereas if you imagine maybe a public school that's all cement with high walls and it looks like a prison, there's barbed wire fences on top of the walls, security guards, that, I mean, it's like a play. The teachers, if you cast the teacher in the role of enforcers, that invites the students to step into the role of rebellious troublemakers. Whereas if you cast the teacher in the role of nurturing, affectionate parent figure, that invites the students to step into a role of respectful, engaged student. Of course, this doesn't, as he was saying, doesn't work all the time. If we need to, there is a disciplinary protocol. This does come up. It's actually been something we've been wrestling with in the last months because we have had some severe disciplinary infractions recently, which I think is, and being prepared to hold those boundaries is a very hard but very important part of our job. It really saddens us when something happens and a student is not able to continue at Oak Grove at this time. You know, that's hard for everyone involved. But at the same time, it's part of our duty. We need to make this a safe space for students to feel secure. That's not just security from the teachers. That's also secure with their fellow students. And if there's anybody who's engaging in behavior that really feels not right to other students, it's a really important part of our position on the campus to be prepared to hold those boundaries. Yeah?
Before, I've heard in previous gatherings years ago discussions of the disciplinary process you spoke of, and I was 20 years middle school teacher in Los Angeles Unified. And, well, here, aside from general view of education and all that, you have, you know, small classes, you know, 10. I understand they're a little bit larger now, maybe 15, or I don't know what the average is now, but, and so you have that small group to start with, and then also most of the parents are middle class, college educated, you know, have read to their children when they're small and all of this. And those of us who work with students in classes of, you know, 25 to 35 students in a class, and they come from backgrounds where the parents are not middle class, not college educated, do not read to their children in school, you have an entirely different situation. And well, as a matter of fact, in my last years there was starting to be a new discipline idea that was somewhat similar to the one I heard expounded here some years ago at the Oak Grove, as to examining it and all that. They were going to have, you know, like counselors and various people involved in, you know, questioning, you know, why do they do this and sort of thing. But it was very, I don't know if they've ever got beyond the stage, you know, into how you would actually logistically implement this and, you know, have enough money and staff to actually put into effect this method. And I was just wondering if you don't have this luxury of small class size, college educated parents and all of this, how much of these methods, or what related methods, could one use in a setting that has large classes and students of parents who are not mostly middle class, college educated?
I think if I answer that question quickly, then I could go far in the world. But I would briefly say, I think it needs to be a systemic approach that everybody from the top down is committed to, all staff, all administration, all teachers. It helps if a school is founded with these principles. It's hard to shift a culture once it's already created. That's a very challenging task. But the students move through. And if you do start making changes, they're going to be themselves no matter what. It has, how we engage with them as adults has a big impact. And as the students cycle through, and some graduate and others are brought up with these ideals and these modes of being, the culture can shift. I would encourage you to look at this book called Beyond Discipline by Alfie Kohn, and it pretty much addresses exactly what you were talking about, like how, and he cites a lot of cases of success with the kinds of classrooms you're describing.
Larger and not college educated.
Exactly, yeah.
It's just hard to imagine getting as much as I might personally look down upon the reward and punishment idea. It's hard to actually get away from it in those circumstances.
Yeah. I would say look at the book. That book, Alfie Kohn, presents a lot of, it's not Krishnamoorthy related, but it's one that I was exposed to in graduate school. Beyond Discipline. And it pretty much addresses exactly what you're talking about. How to build this culture of trust in an environment where the students are not used to that and don't have the background to make it come easily.
Krishnamurthy's approach to education has filtered into other parts of the world. And there are teacher training courses given where K is a textbook. So we know that there are educators who are grappling with these issues in their own school environment. There was a woman from, I believe, North Carolina, who did her PhD thesis on the Oak Grove School, went back and became the head of a teacher training college. And she said that it was possible to take elements, dimensions from Krishnamoorthy's approach and transplant them to public schools. She said it depended completely on the mentality of the teacher. It could not be mandated, it could not be written into the manual of instruction, the articles of discipline and so on. It could only be evidenced in the relationship that a teacher had with his or her students. There are in the world, in many countries, small experiments in education that are inspired by Krishnamoorthy. There are people who've started schools based on their understanding of K. Some of them still exist. They're very low profile, in most cases private schools. But we also know that there are state systems that have taken an interest. Several years ago, I was invited to Chicago, to the Chicago Board of Education, which is the largest board, the largest school district in the United States. They asked me to speak to the board. Before I went, they spent 18 of their sessions listening to the Krishnamoorthy Anderson tapes. And if you know those, it's a series of 18 dialogues, half hour each, that Krishnamoorthy had with a leading educator. So this Board of Education went through the whole 18 tapes over a period of 18 months. And then I appeared. They were full of questions. I was not able to give much of a talk because they had so many questions. Most of the questions had to do with them describing the conditions of their public school, the Chicago East Side. You can imagine. One very passionate, very intense woman stood up and she said, "Look, honey," she called me honey. She said, "Look, honey, this all sounds good on television, screen, and I've read a K book, but it doesn't work in my classroom." And then she reiterated, she said, "I have lost 3 students to gun violence, killed." She said, "Half of my students are at this moment on crack." She said, "We expel on the average of a quarter of my class every year." And this litany continued of the unbelievable conditions, probably not too unlike Rikers Island, of her classroom. And her question was, what should she do? I was at a great loss to first have a compassionate response, and second, to give her any sense of what relevance Krishnamurti was to her. What I said in the end was, "It has nothing to do with your class, madam. It has nothing to do with your students. If Krishnamurti has any impact on a teacher, it is simply on their own being, them as an educator, as a human being. How do they respond to whatever challenge they're faced with?" I said that it was only possible for her to have a different attitude, and perhaps with that different attitude towards her class, that she could make a difference. At the end of the 2.5 hours that they gave me, she came up to me. And when I say to you she was a large woman, believe me, I'm not small myself, but when she hugged me, I disappeared. She thanked me. She said, I've been blaming my students. I've been blaming the schools. I've been blaming this Board of Education my whole career. She said, but now I've seen something different. So, I would say there is something applicable in public education.
So I have a question, and I'm not sure if I'm naive, but having read the teachings, right, and thinking about schools, my imagination goes to, well, Krishnamoorthy said so many things that were true just about the world. So my imagination goes to, well, like I asked myself, well, what would I have done, right? Given that I've never been a teacher and blah, blah, blah. But one imagines. So I was thinking, well, first of all, I would bring the teachings to the students. And secondly, I thought, well, if I do history, for instance, right, I would intertwine the teachings with the teaching of history, so that history is taught, so that the teachings are used as a lens to look at history. Or if it's English, right, English is fairly simple, you can pick up a lot of things that Krishnamoorthy talks about, to kind of see, how this has been occurring in both in the imaginations of people as well as in reality, right? And then also when I thought about math and science, I was thinking, well, it's a way to show unity, the lack of separation in some sense. So what I'm wondering about is, I don't see, number one, is that, and the last thing I want to say is clarity, I would expect that and I have a question from Mark about that the parents, the teachers, and the students have some interest in a clear mind, Of course, all of us falter all the time, but that there's some passion for it, inside. And the question, and one, if it is clear that this is what the school is about, then all the activities that are leading to, well, not all of them, but at least the major things that are causing the disciplinary actions are obviously leading away from clarity, right? So one could address it in terms of clarity rather than just in terms of discipline, try to speak to that so that there's an internal review of what you're doing, with your own life. So my question is, but what I see here is a totally different approach. I'm not quite sure what's going on in the school, really. It seems silent, maybe there's a depth to it, I don't know, because each individual is probably working on themselves. But my question is, has anyone ever considered intertwining and bringing the teachings to the students and looking at quote-unquote subjects? Because from what I've understood of the California curriculum, you don't need a particular content. You need to pass certain things on to the student, and you can choose any content. So you can bring Krishnamurthy and content together and use your own creativity to do that if you really wanted to. So has anyone thought of that? And if not, my question is why? And the other question I have to Mark is this whole question of clarity. What is the difference? It seems like from the videos that I've seen that in the olden times when the school was first started, there was a lot more depth to it in terms of the teachings. And now the question is, right now, I don't see people the students or the teachers, I don't know about the administration, really looking at their lives seriously in terms of the teachings. So my question is, what has changed? So sorry for asking so many questions.
the question I answered. When you need people's assistance.
I mean, yes, of course we've, everybody has thought of bringing the question? Oh yeah, so to repeat the question, there was two parts. The first part is, have we considered bringing Krishnamurti's teachings into the classroom related to the content, like looking at the content through the lens of the teachings? And what has changed over the years? So to address the first part, yes, of course we've thought of and often do this. As sort of something Mark said earlier, is that this sort of thing has to come from the teacher. It can't be like pushed down from above, or it doesn't work. And so it's really, in most classrooms, it's left up to the individual teacher how and when to integrate Krishnamurti's teachings in a direct way. And most of us do. But it's not all the time. Like, it'll be brought up here and brought up there. But it depends on the individual teacher and how their own connection to the teachings and the knowledge that they have and what speaks to them is what they end up using. Does that help answer it a little bit?
We also now, like, Ashton started this thing where, like, once in 2 weeks we have inquiry, which is like anyone, like a student or teacher or any staff member can bring up something to talk about for like 40 minutes maybe. And we have had like Krishnamurti passages that we've read and then talked about. And also, like, I think even if there's no like Krishnamurti presence like in the classroom, there's a lot of it outside, even in like just the conversations that we have amongst each other and our teachers. So even if like we're not like learning about Krishnamurti in history class or math class, I still feel like we are still learning about Krishnamurti and the teachings.
Tripti, you raise two very difficult and serious issues. The difference between the early school and the current school is not much, at least from my point of view, except we have seen over the evolution of time, as the school has grown in size, we have had an uneven cross-section of faculty interested in Krishnamurti's approach. Some years we have the whole faculty is seriously interested. Other years, only a few. So it's not a constant that we can guarantee. We've seen that because there is really, in fact, there is no content to Krishnamurti's teachings. There's no real content. You could not extract a Bible out of Krishnamurti. You could not extract a catechism out of Krishnamurti. You could not extract a method or a system out of K. We have seen in some schools they have attempted to create guidelines that come out of the teachings. Soft rules and regulations. The student will treat the animals in the barnyard and the plants in the garden with respect. So that becomes a rule. So if you go and abuse the goat, or do something with the apple orchard, you could be punished. There would be a consequence. So we have tried a whole variety. Different schools have tried different approaches to integrate Krishnamoorthy into the school. In India and at Brockwood, they actually have classes in the teachings, where the teaching is read. You read a passage, and you write an interpretation, or you write an essay, or an explanation of what you've understood. And they go through it in the teachings in a very systematic way, and try to extract from it principles. These have been abandoned. I mean, we're not above experimenting with it, but we've seen the difficulty, we've seen the extreme difficulty in dumbing down the teachings, turning them into something intelligible for a young mind. It does not work. The other part of this is, if you have classes in K, and we've tried changing the names, classes in learning. I mean, you could play with it in many different ways, but it comes to the same. We find that the students' reaction, the students' response, because students are very insightful. They know what kind of a school they've come to, particularly from 9th to 12th grade. They know what this school is all about. They have accused the school of being a cult, of attempting to inculcate a value system, a softer conditioning, not the blatant conditioning of society or the public school, but a softer conditioning based on love, affection, attention, caring, consideration, all of those key words. So you see the dilemma for the school, how to embody such a teaching in the school. We are still experimenting. We're still finding ways. What it comes to, though, in the end, and this goes for all 8 schools, and that is, it depends on the integrity, the insight, the maturity of the teacher. If the teacher has an understanding for themselves of what this school stands for, that will be conveyed in the chemistry class. That will be conveyed on the games field. Coming from a deep personal understanding, not from an intellectual approach, not from teaching something about it.
Can I have one more? Oh, sorry.
Partly says, and 8 school is one. One school have 8 campus. And my question is that possible? How the people do for that? One school, 8 campus. How the people do now for that?
That's simply a verbal description of our intention. Obviously, each school is an entity unto itself. It reflects the local culture. It abides by all the local regulations. It's accredited by their national or regional accrediting, etc. So the schools have unique locales to operate as schools. It is in the intention of the school. It is in the inner work of the school. It is what connects all of the faculty together. It's what attracts the parents to the school, where we can say it is one school. The schools share those important dimensions. When I described this morning the religious dimension of a school, all of our schools share that their work is essentially to create a religious environment. That religious environment you can share, you can communicate, you can argue about, you can explore, all of that. So that's what brings them all together, from their disparate campuses to one intention. I don't know if that answers you. This gentleman had another question.
I just want to get back to what you said, Mark. I totally understand. I agree with you, and I have experienced this also, that it is entirely up to the teacher to convey that, to be able to get the best out of the kids or the students, whatever type of students you are having to deal with. That is, but having said that, and that's the only way I had some pretty good positive outcomes in my teaching, not only at the Rikers Island Maximum Security Prison School, but also in the New York City top schools like LA, the same type of schools. And I had some limited, but certainly positive outcomes which I really cherish. But in addition, I had also the experience of teaching for 5 years on a voluntary capacity in a school in Sri Lanka, which was devastated by 20 years of war. And these kids had, not kids, they are also adults, who had gone through, I mean, unbelievable horrors in their life for the 20 years. They have seen their mothers being raped before their eyes and their parents shot and so on. And we had a school of 60 students there for 5 years. And that it was the culture that they came from that made them so different from the same type of kids who had terrible backgrounds, even in schools here. But there, the culture or that made a difference. They had, in fact, that was the 5 years was my best 5 years. I'm an engineer by profession. My teaching was a second career, but even when I consider my engineering profession, I don't think I had a better professional experience for that 5 years in voluntary teaching than in that school. Because the respect and the motivation to be educated after 20 years of of just fighting violence was there, and also the culture of being in that society with respect for the elders, teaching, and so on. So that also makes a difference in the whole thing, the dimension of culture and the history and the background and the context from which the students come from, makes a difference.
Mark, I just thought that I would ask you to bring the definition of a religious school to this group as you did this morning, because that word has particular connotations, and you were able to reframe it in terms of what you mean in terms of Krishnamoorthy's intention. And I liked what you said this morning. I thought you might just so that you ensure that when you use that word, we all know what.
Right. It's a loaded word. And because it's loaded, and because it has such deep, deep spiritual, cultural roots in all of us, it has to be looked at differently, and therefore we don't use it casually, we don't use it easily, we don't use it in the advertising or even in the description of the school, because it's so easily misunderstood. Religious in the sense that the school, and Krishnamurthy uses the word, has to do with the ancient, the early definition, which is to re-examine, to look with care, to look with attention. That's the original meaning of it. How it's changed over a million years. Therefore, a school that is a religious school, or a school that has a religious intent, is one that approaches every activity, every aspect of its work, of the learning environment, of the relationships, of the communications, of the way the school is taken care of. All of it, if it is seen with a religious mind, a religious approach, is one that speaks to care, attention, affection, and love. Your behavior is completely different. If this is the grounding of your consciousness, if this is the way you approach your work, care and attention. So in that way, we talk about it. I'll tell you a story that when I was 13 years old, I was not a very good Christian boy. I lived in Santa Barbara, and I went to church when my parents forced me to. One time I went to church, and the minister, his name was Dr. Fisher, in a sermon he said, Christ was not a Christian, and Buddha was not a Buddhist. I took that home, and it woke me up. I thought there's something wrong with what I'm doing, what my parents, what the minister is talking about. If Christ was not a Christian, what is wrong here? I went to the school library. I looked up in the Encyclopedia Britannica, and I read about Christianity, and I discovered what a religion was. I looked up Buddhism and Buddha, and I discovered what Buddhism was. I discussed this with my mother, and I told her that I was going to leave the church. She understood what I felt. I went to Dr. Fisher, and I said, I don't want to be a Christian. I don't want to have my name in your church. Will you please take me off your rolls, or I called it rolls. I think it was a register or something. He looked at me horror-stricken, and he said, have you told your parents? And I said, yes, they agree with me. But what happened to me at the age of 13 was I saw that there was a huge divide between what Christ said, what Buddha said, and what these churches were offering. And I didn't want to have any part in it. That has stayed with me all my life. So, I think that for a young mind to be exposed to what the culture has developed over tens of thousands of years in terms of organized religion is important. They have to see it because it's so deeply embedded in our psyche, in our consciousness, in our culture. We don't say, don't go to church, don't believe in any of this, but we do talk about belief. We do raise the issue of fundamentalism, what it means to have a religious icon. All of this we go into. The mind that I had at 13 in the 1950s, very different from a 13-year-old today. Very different. The world is different. The churches are different. The religion is different. And we have to go into this with our students.
Sanaya and Annalise, I know you'll both have very different answers to this, but because you spend a different amount of time at other K schools, but I'm wondering, do you feel like there is a cohesion, the feeling of a one school? And also, what would you suggest to make the schools more unified, to feel more like the one?
I feel like the schools, like all the teachers in the different schools want the same thing for their children at the different schools. So that's like that kind of like holds them together. That's one of the things. But I do also feel like they're very different from each other. But I think that that's just because like they're in different countries and continents and in different cultures. And I think that's just what makes them different. Like the schools in India are more conservative in some ways and like things like that. But in general, I do think like that they're very similar. And when I went to the schools too, like Rishi Valley or any of the other schools that we visited, like they really felt like I really felt comfortable there. And I just feel like there's so much love for each other and for community in all of these schools, and for Krishnamoorthy, and that's kind of what makes it one school for me. And I don't really know for the other part of your question of what we could do to make it feel more like one school.
So for ways we can to make it feel more like one school, I think Oak Grove's doing better, as in for the past 2 years we've been sending people to Brockwood. That's really helped, and just the seniors going to India. It's promoted a lot of communications between the people at each school. So okay, so does it feel like one school? Yeah, it's going to be different because there's different cultures in each of the countries. But there is a connection in that when I went to Brockwood, there's some kind of level of thinking that is similar between the two schools. If I came from a public school or any other school, I don't think I would have thought as deeply about the certain questions they asked. Even the kids were very thoughtful there. asking, one of their go-to questions when they met us was, what are your passions? What do you want to do with your life? And that was something that isn't thought about very much. But I think at the K schools, you're taught to think very deeply, and the kind of philosophies behind the teachings promoted like a kind of understanding between the people at each of the schools.
Thank you very much.
And also there are some materials, if you, outside of the door on the left, that you can take about the school if you're interested. And I'm here if you have any questions, particularly about Oak Grove.